Today, I'm out in the southeast garden, and I want to talk all about the history of our land, the quality of our soil, and what we are doing to improve the quality. First, let's talk about the history of this land. My husband and I looked for years to buy our first home with a little piece of land on it. It took years of visiting places. We could never find the right fit. Finally, we found an acre of land with a little concrete block house on it. It was a 1950 home, original, a bit of a fixer-upper, but it didn't have any major structural issues. But we were really excited about this land because it's a really beautiful acre of land, partially wooded, part is full sun, with an adjacent half acre, which is a dried up wetland. It's actually a dried up lake bottom. We're gonna get into the soil specifics of that in a little bit. So we have an acre of land that we have fenced in. I actually managed to fence that in with my husband by hand while I was very pregnant this summer. It was one of the hardest farming jobs that I've ever done. At some times we actually used a manual post hole digger. Other days we rented an auger from Home Depot, which was not cheap. And we got our 6-inch caliper posts sunk nice and deep with some cattle panel fencing all around. This is gonna make sure that we keep the larger animals off the property, out of the veggie gardens. And in case we ever decide to get into keeping animals on the land, it's gonna do a pretty good job of keeping them contained on the property. Now, we also have an adjacent half acre, which is a dried up lake bottom. It's technically a wetland, so it can never be built on. We're not gonna have neighbors there. So we were able to purchase that adjacent land, and we can do agriculture, any horticulture on that land. We just can't put a permanent structure on it. So functionally, we have about 1.5 acres to play with, which is so cool, so much fun. I've successfully put in a raised bed garden with my Epic gardening beds, the metal ones, they're so cool. I also have 2 fields here that are in-ground plantings with drip irrigation, the southeast and the southwest garden. And of course, I'm planting up my food forest. Now, in planning the layout of the homestead, I didn't have a ton of history on the property to go with. So we had to follow some clues that we found as we were first exploring this property. When we first moved onto the land, we noticed a ton of garbage. What we specifically noticed was this neighbor over here, who has since moved, was throwing their garbage onto this property for years. It was a huge heartbreak when we realized that we were going to spend the first several weeks of our home ownership just picking garbage out of the soil. Our hearts kind of sank. But this is a realistic situation for someone who bought their land for pretty cheap and doesn't have any sort of secret trust fund or extra money to buy a super bougie piece of land. This was a slightly abused piece of land, but we've got some tricks up our sleeve to clean up this soil and ensure that we've got a safe place to grow food for our family. So the southeast garden here gets full sun year round. This is one of my most valuable in-ground planting areas because of the sun exposure. I have highly sandy soil, as does everybody in Central Florida, but this area is super sandy, and when I first moved in, it had a significant amount of trash from the neighbors, and it had a major weed seed bed of asparagus fern, which is a pretty aggressive plant that you'll find growing wild in the soil here in Florida. There were a number of different weeds, but mostly a little wild blackberry and asparagus fern were what I found in the soil here. It took me a long time to pull those weeds, and I did end up doing an initial tilling of this land. I am not a dyed-in-the-wool, no-till farmer by any means, but I also didn't want to overwork my land or hurt the structure of my soil. But oftentimes when we first move onto a piece of land and there's a significant weed seed bed or major compaction issues, one initial tilling before you get something like a cover crop in can be permissible and even helpful. So we used a pretty heavy duty tiller. We moved through the southeast plot to get the soil nice and worked up. And my next step was to think about what crops could actually clean up and add nutrition to this soil. Now, one thing I did not do is I did not take a soil test. I broke a cardinal rule. When you first move onto a piece of land and start gardening, the very first thing you should do is a soil test. Here's the deal. 1, I already know the deal with this soil because I've taken a pretty deep assessment It's very sandy. It's incredibly nutrient poor. One day I will get around to taking a soil test, but truthfully, I was pregnant, I was busy. I never got around to taking a sample. But I did use my context clues between just seeing the physical texture of the soil and observing the kinds of weeds that naturally were thriving in the area. I know that I have got sugar sand soil, and I'm going to have to greatly improve the organic matter in the soil in order to make my plants thrive. What I decided to do to improve the organic matter is to plant a green manure, a cover crop. So I started with something called fenugreek. Fenugreek is a legume. It's a member of the bean family. So it has this incredible ability to take nitrogen molecules from the atmosphere and store them in little nodules on the roots of the plant. And I have to just plant these, let them thrive, and once they get to a certain point, when the plants have made a soft green pod, that is the perfect time to take these plants, rip them out of the soil. I can break them up, I could till them in, or I could just crimp them over, basically bend them over at the base, and lay them on top of the soil. I also could till them into the soil. The goal is to kill the plants before they make a mature seed pod, because I don't want to create weeds in the future, and to make sure that I pull the plants out and just let the organic matter, the leaves, rot into the soil to add nutrition and a little bit of texture to the soil. So I'm killing off my cover crop, and my next planting is actually going to be tomatoes. So I'm going to call that the main crop or the cash crop. I planted a cover crop before my cash crop because I know tomatoes are a fairly heavy feeder. They're a bit finicky about soil quality. So I knew I was not going to be able to just come out to this garden that has never been worked before, or has never been worked by me. I don't think this has ever been a garden before, or even in the previous homeowners. I can't just come out to this soil and do whatever I want, plant a organic matter hungry, finicky main crop. I have to come out and work this soil, give it a little bit of love first with a cover crop. I also allowed the plants that were thriving on this property when it was fallow and unworked to give me some information. Like I said, there was a lot of dog fennel in this soil, as well as wild blackberry. What's something I know about both of those plants is that they're very water thrifty and they love sandy soil. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to notice that this soil is super sandy, but I am going to listen to the plants that were thriving there before and think, okay, I know that I'm going to need supplemental irrigation and extra organic matter if I'm going to plant crops that need a little bit more TLC. Things like dog fennel and wild blackberry are crops that thrive with super neglect and in sandy, dry soil. I didn't find any weeds or plants thriving that love rich organic matter. I found plants that can survive super sandy, dry soil. So I'm going to make sure that I take measures to really work this soil, get it to a higher organic matter point, and to use supplemental irrigation because this soil is bone dry. Here is our fencing. Now, when we first moved onto this land, the previous owner had sunk these massive 6-inch caliper poles into the ground. He had attempted to fence the acre of land, but I think he ran out of money before he got his wire in. So what we did is we came along, we actually had to pull out all of the posts and dig them deeper because they were very shallow when they were set in. So last summer, my husband and I came along and we dug these posts deeper into the ground and we pulled this fence ourselves. I had to build a fence stretcher. We had to use a come along on the back of my truck. It was a heavy duty project to put an acre of cattle fencing in while you are super pregnant in a Florida summer. I would not recommend. It is definitely not for the faint of heart, but we got it done and now we have security around our property. It was definitely worth doing, but boy, it was a lot of work. Of course, we've all seen the raised bed garden. Now, I obviously don't have to worry about the soil in these beds because I bought in some really beautiful, high quality raised bed mix. And I'm using the Epic Gardening metal raised beds, which are fantastic for my area because it's hot and humid and wooden raised garden beds break down in under 2 years. Since we're talking about the history of the property today, I don't want to leave out the home in our homestead. This is the house that we bought. It's 700 square feet or just shy. It's concrete block and it was built in the 50s. Very much a fixer-upper. We put a lot of work, time, and love into the house. And since mostly we're excited about gardening and growing here, we've kind of kept it simple inside. But I just wanted to mention that we did buy this house, like I said, 1.5 acres of land and a small home, and this is where we're living. We didn't know a whole lot about this property when we first bought the house, but we did know that the previous owner had turkeys and goats. So let's take a look at his old turkey coop. Guys, this is a big deal for me. I grew up with chickens on my own farm when I was a little kid, and I loved having chickens. I loved having fresh eggs, but I do remember my mom really hated when chicken poop would make its way into the house on the bottom of people's shoes. We don't wear shoes in our house, but still, I'm super nervous that we're gonna be getting chicken poop all over the place. But I did decide with the price of eggs lately, it was time to get some chickens. So I have finally, for the first time since I left home when I was 18 years old, I've got chickens again. Here's another little treasure that we found on the property when we first moved here a year ago. It's a massive clump of bamboo. This thing had to be planted 50 years ago, and the canes are massive. Let's get a closer look. I can use these for trellising. I don't know if this is an edible variety of bamboo. I'm truly a novice when it comes to bamboo, but I do know that this is a non-spreading, non-invasive type. This is a clumping style bamboo. And the neighbors had speculated that this has been around for about 50 years. It is a super established clump. We absolutely love our clump of bamboo. It's super tall. It does cast a little bit of shade on the southwest garden, but it's totally worth it because it makes the property feel tropical, magical, mystical, totally worth it. The southeast garden is super interesting because it gets full sun in the winter and it gets part shade in the summer. This is ideal. When the sun goes through its trajectory in the summer, it gets blocked out partially by that patch of bamboo, which gives us some nice afternoon shade. This is ideal for Florida because in the summer it is so intensely hot, it can burn up even the most heat and humidity loving crops. So getting a little afternoon shade is going to be really helpful for anything that I plant up here in the summertime. And in the winter, because the sun is farther to the south through the sky, it actually does not get caught up in that bamboo patch, so we get full sun in the winter here. It's perfect. I love the southwest garden. The soil here in the southwest garden is much the same as the southeast garden. It's highly sandy. Now, I didn't find as much dog fennel and bramble in this soil. I think because of the part shade, it's not quite as dry here. The soil does hold a bit more moisture because it's getting some part shade. It's not so parched out here. I don't find the soil gets as hydrophobic here, which means that the soil doesn't resist water if it gets too dry. I also managed to add some good quality compost directly into the soil here, and that has helped with the organic matter. And I did not put in an initial cover crop in the southwest garden because I didn't feel like it needed it. This soil was just a little bit better quality and I was a little bit impatient and I wanted to go right to my main crop. Now, over this summer, I do plan to put some cowpeas into this garden, which is going to fix nitrogen and add some nutrition to the soil. Maybe I'll mix it up with some other kinds of cover crops. I just don't know yet. But the history of this garden is, it's amazing. I love it. I don't know if anybody ever grew here before, but it is the perfect location for a little in-ground bed. I'm a huge fan and the soil's pretty good. There's also one other possibility with why this area is thriving, and that's because it is adjacent to the dried lake bottom of our extra half acre, which has more of a muck soil. It's a little bit higher in organic matter, a little bit better quality. Let's take a look. This is our back half acre. Now we have yet to fence this back half acre in, and right now I just have my potted blueberry plants out here. It is a little bit of extra labor to hand water these plants, but because they're getting full sun, they're super happy out here. I'm definitely gonna take a soil sample for the back half acre, and we're going to make a planting plan, get something like a little food forest or a mini orchard planted out back. We haven't really started working on the back half acre yet because we've been so busy with the house and the front acre property. So this is a very exciting space, full of potential and opportunity. I just have to decide what's gonna go in here. I hope you guys liked learning a little bit about the history of this land and how we're working on the soil to improve it. I am so excited for our little food forest journey to begin and get going. Thank you guys for joining, and we'll see you next time.